Hey everybody, welcome to episode 1 of Avalon. Now, this project has basically one main objective: build the largest city in City Skylines that I can possibly build while adding details, designing interesting infrastructure, really with no end goal. I just want to keep expanding the city and make it as large as possible. I want to build a ridiculous population. I want to have a well-executed infrastructure that can handle high populations. I want to have really good public transit. And of course, I also want the city to look good, so we're going to have aesthetic design and focus on really adding in as many details as we can to bring the city to life. Now, before we jump into the meat of this first episode, let's talk about the elephant in the room. Why Snowfall? Why am I playing in Snowfall? Because it seems like nobody likes Snowfall, and probably for good reason, because if you look on the workshop, there are not a lot of assets that are built for Snowfall. I mean, you can use assets in Snowfall, but a lot of assets don't look great in Snowfall, and there aren't a lot of things geared specifically towards Snowfall. It seems like this is one of those DLCs that didn't really take off like the other ones did, but I had so much fun building Tamku Wilderness, which is the map we're working on right now, that I really wanted to go ahead and give it a shot. It is very different than anything I've done before, and of course, we don't have a whole lot of selection when it comes to specific assets, and namely in the foliage category. There's really hardly any good foliage on the workshop for Snowfall right now, which is sort of a blessing and a curse. The reason why I say it's a blessing is I feel like in my past projects, I've spent so much more time landscaping than literally anything else. And don't get me wrong, I love landscaping, but I really wanted this one to be focused a little bit more on infrastructure, on design, on building up a big city, and I feel like landscaping can be something that just sort of gets in the way over time. So I'm thinking that going the Snowfall route will definitely cut back on the amount of landscaping done per episode and put the focus more on city building and city management. Now, there is one more thing I want to talk about regarding Snowfall, and I think this is the main reason why so many people don't like Snowfall maps very much. And that's that it's just really, really hard to get a good looking LUT because everything is white for one thing. So it's hard to even get color into your city to begin with. So if you have any sort of non-neutral LUT that has too much red or green or blue or yellow or whatever, all of a sudden your snow looks like some weird tint. So you need a pretty neutral LUT, and more importantly, you need some control over the global lighting settings so that your city looks a little bit better. And you're going to notice, especially in these first few episodes before a mod that I'm going to talk about in a minute came out, all the lighting is going to be kind of whack. So the cinematics that I'm recording are current, and you'll probably see a pretty noticeable difference in the look and everything. It'll look much, much cleaner, but this was all pre-Relight mod. And Relight mod is super critical to anybody who ever wants to play in Snowfall. So this mod allows you to tweak things beyond what an LUT can, so you can actually tweak twilight shades and things that come in during like sunset and sunrise. You can tweak the lighting levels far beyond what you can anywhere else. So I'm using combinations of Relight and Ultimate Eye Candy. And I did just totally date this project, by the way, because this Relight wasn't even out whenever I started this project. This has been ongoing for like 6 or 7 months now, I think. So this is way in the past whenever I first started this project. But Relight is a total lifesaver. So if you don't use Relight, definitely go check it out. Relight, post-processing effects, and Ultimate Eye Candy are all pretty critical to making a Snowfall map look fantastic. So I think that with the addition of this mod in the workshop, it's actually possible now to have pretty good looking Snowfall style maps. So hopefully more people will start playing in Snowfall. I don't know, but for now anyway, I think this will be a fun project to do that is a little refreshing, a little bit different than your typical, tropical island or temperate location or whatever. Now that that's all out of the way, let's talk a little bit about the approach going into building a really dense and really high population area in City Skylines, because I think this is kind of an intimidating thing. I mean, at least it is for me, definitely. I mean, if you're not somebody who likes to add a lot of details or put in lots of props and all these things, then it's a bit less of a daunting task, because once you start building stuff and you start adding buildings and your population comes in, and you all of a sudden have some traffic problems, all you got to do is just, move stuff around and add new entryways and exit points for the highway, and you're good to go. But if you're like me and you're adding lots of details and you're trying to really refine locations and you want to be able to just completely detail and, finish off locations as you go, it's really kind of a tough task to start setting up highways and roads and public transit and all these things that are going to serve this area, especially if it's going to be a high population area, because the last thing you want to do is design an area and then spend all this time detailing it and then find out that it can't handle a high population. You have all this congestion and problems and you got to change stuff, and now you've got to delete all these things you've done. So the way that I'm going to tackle this is to kind of go in phases. So the first thing I want to do is build a highway infrastructure, and that's what this episode and episode 2 are going to focus on in their entirety. And in fact, I will actually release episode 2 pretty much back to back with this one, because I know that a lot of you guys may not be interested in watching just highway design, and that's kind of what the first 2 are. I needed to have that much time to work on the infrastructure, so I will go back to back on those so we can get into the downtown detailing stuff very soon. So don't worry about that if you're not a fan of this kind of stuff. But we're going to start with the highway infrastructure, and that's because this stuff is really the stuff that's difficult to change, and I want to be able to just think purely in terms of vehicles on the road and how can we get vehicles in and out of the city efficiently. How can we have, various entry and exit points onto the highway that sort of split the traffic and don't put a whole lot of vehicles in the same location all at once. So once we can kind of simplify the problem to something like that, and we can get a good highway infrastructure built, then we can start thinking about, okay, where do we have issues in terms of high traffic, and we can start solving those problems with better metro lines, better bus lines, and having lots of walkability. And the end goal is hopefully to not have that much use at all on these highways and roads and things, because we have such good metro lines and bus lines and city connections through train lines and things like that. So that's kind of like the phase 2, and that stuff can be implemented kind of later on, even if we've already started adding detailing. So that's why this first step is so important. So once we get these highways in, and once we have an infrastructure that I feel like will be pretty good for handling a high population, because like I said, this downtown area could potentially have, upwards of 100,000 people or more within, like a 5x5 block radius, something like that. And these are big blocks. Obviously, you've seen how big these blocks are already, but 5x5 is still pretty tight. And we want to make sure that we can handle this stuff pretty well with the highways. So I'll start stress testing this in the second and third episodes with some big buildings, and we'll see how our traffic flows from there. And I think that by doing it this way, we're sort of eliminating some of the variables. If you're just trying to go into this and think about every single possible way, like, okay, where could the traffic go? Where do all the metro lines need to go? And you're trying to do all that stuff at once, it's just going to be a nightmare. So I think that at least having the highway infrastructure done and then testing it a little bit, and then once we're sort of comfortable with this and we think that the highway is going to be good enough, then I'll start adding the buildings, then I'll start detailing stuff, and then we can start doing the metro lines and other things as we expand outwards. So we'll give this a shot. I think it'll work. I'm not super nervous, but again, I haven't really built something with this much population density before in City Skylines, and I do know that this game gets a little bit wonky when you get some high populations and you have, issues with cars not using all the lanes, and you've got weird traffic problems. So I would imagine that this series will probably have some troubleshooting where all of a sudden we've got like some bad traffic in certain areas, because I'm planning on actually double plopping residential buildings and using some of these like workshop residential buildings. They can host like 300 plus households in a single building. So really lots of buildings that aren't necessarily in the base game and can really, really pack some high density in a tight location. So again, I wouldn't be surprised if there's some troubleshooting later on, but I think it'll be fun, honestly. I think it'll be really interesting to see if we can solve these problems and continue expanding outwards, and hopefully just have a downtown area that, despite its high population, still has little congestion, lots of walking, and lots of public transit use. So now that we're about 2/3 of the way through this episode, I want to talk more specifically about what I'm trying to achieve by designing this seemingly convoluted and totally unnecessary highway network above our grid. So what this all comes down to is I want to avoid any unnecessary traffic on the downtown grid itself and keep everything either in public transit or on the highways above the grid. So the real goal here is leave the downtown grid only for service vehicles, emergency vehicles, and anyone who absolutely needs to be in a car on the grid itself. And then other than that, we can alleviate all traffic and keep the rest of that in public transit or walking or on the highways getting to the central point. Now, the central point plays a really key role in this, and you may have noticed me building that at the beginning of the episode. This central point gives access to the metro lines, to lots of walkability via elevated pathways and things, which will come in future episodes. And then, of course, the bus routes, and really just direct access to our train lines, which are also other means of getting to the city from outside connections. So with the highways in place, the idea would be anybody coming from outside the city could either take the train straight to the central point, or they could take a vehicle via the highway and not even have to touch our grid, but stay on the highway and then take a dedicated highway branch, which keeps them off of the throughput highway, which is just for people going through the city itself. So they're on their own highway going straight to the central point, and then they can hop off that and take public transit. And then even people within the city itself should, in theory, have access to metro lines and things that will make their trip shorter via hopping from some metro station to some other metro station and then walking to our destination, really only leaving the absolute edge case people who are just in some very inconvenient spot in the city and they absolutely need to take their cars from point A to point B. And that would be really the one exception to not using public transit, and they would have to drive from their location to whatever destination they're going to on the grid itself. But other than that, hopefully, in theory, this will prevent really any unnecessary traffic on the grid itself and keep that open for service vehicles, emergency vehicles, and anyone who absolutely needs to drive on our roads. Now, as for the throughput highway system, or really just the highways that let people get from one side of a city to the other and kind of just drive through the downtown area, this is actually only one of 3 connections to our downtown area, although it is definitely the biggest connection point. So this one actually splits, as you may have noticed, it splits around the central station. So it kind of becomes 2 highways at some point in the very downtown area. But we're also going to have 2 other highway connections from opposing sides of the downtown area. And all of these are going to come together in one gigantic interchange that will not only basically have to be an interchange between 4 highways, but also give access to the grid below, making this a gigantic interchange that is a ton of fun to build, by the way, and will be in the next episode. So if you're interested in that, definitely check out the next episode. I really recommend it, even if you're not usually a fan of these kinds of highway-only videos. I do think this is going to be a pretty fun episode to talk about and show off to you guys. So again, this one will come out pretty much back-to-back with the first episode that I'm releasing right now. So you can watch that one if you'd like. And if you'd like to just skip all the highway stuff, don't even worry about it. Go ahead and check out episode 3, and that will be finally diving into actually testing out our highway infrastructure and building up the downtown area. But with all that said, we are pretty much at the end of the episode now. So I hope you all enjoyed this first episode, some of the kind of details on what I want this project to be. I know it was a lot of just overview stuff and planning stuff, but I figured I'd take this opportunity as we're just building highways and stuff to talk about sort of my plans, and future episodes should get more into the detail of what I'm doing and kind of focus on specific things rather than just the entire project as a whole, as it seems this first episode was. But please do feel free to leave some feedback down below. This is sort of a different format than what I usually do. I try to keep it a little bit shorter, on like the 15 to 20 minute range. I'm thinking that's going to be about the length of all of these episodes going forward. It's not like I'm cutting any content out. It's still the same length in terms of things that I get done per episode. I'm just cutting out a lot more of it footage-wise in the final cut, so you guys don't have to just wade through 30 or 40 minutes of time-lapse and commentary per episode, which I think is just a little bit too long for videos like this. So let me know down below what you think about all that, about the project itself, about the fact that it's in Snowfall, all of these things. I'm very interested in hearing what you guys have to say, but I think that's pretty much it. So as always, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.